coming soon to DVD.
The Flintstones are one of those cartoon families that will probably never go out of style. With reruns on Boomerang and the iconic Stone Age duo in every cereal aisle in America on both Fruity and Cocoa Pebbles boxes alike, it's hard not to know who they are, or at least you recognize them. Growing up, I took my Flintstone vitamins shaped like Fred every morning. But believe it or not, I had never actually sat down to watch a full episode of his show. And I still haven't seen a full one. Before watching this live-action adaptation, I'd considered watching a couple episodes to better familiarize myself with these characters that I'd only ever seen clips and fragmented episodes of, but then I thought it might be cool to have an outsider's perspective of this film. So that's what we're doing. Because of this, it was an even more interesting watch, but before I get into my thoughts on the film, let's start with a plot recap. After Fred Flintstone assists his best friend Barney Rubble in adopting his son Bam Bam, Barney swears that someday he will repay Fred for his selfless deed some way, somehow. That somehow just so happens to be secretly swapping Fred's horribly failed aptitude test scorecard with his own, which happens to be the highest ranking one, landing Fred the vice executive president position at Slade & Company. What they don't know, however, is that the evil company president, Cliff Vandercave, will be setting up the winner to take the fall for his embezzlement scam. As things start to look brighter for the Flintstones, things seem to grow worse and worse by the day for the Rubbles. Through a myriad of misadventures, friendships between the families grow strained and eventually fall apart just before Fred is accused of the premeditated crime he did not commit. As the truth of it all is revealed, Cliff kidnaps the family's children in a last-ditch effort to escape, and the Flintstones and Rubbles overcome the wrongs of the past to band together to rescue them and become friends once more. This cartoon adaptation had 6 wins and 10 nominations, though a lot of them were for the Golden Raspberry Awards, aka the Razzies, and the Stinker Awards, awards that honor the worst films and everything that made them as such. I think the craziest one to me has to be a Razzie for the worst screenplay, and that's only because of the number of writers that worked on this thing. 35 writers played a part in the making of the script over the duration of 6 years before director Brian Levant was happy with it. Only 3 lucky souls managed to get their name in the credits, but that did not stop the Razzies from bestowing this honorable award on 32 of them. Reviewers were not happy with the storyline of this film, saying things like, if the Flintstones had been able to devise a story as interesting as its production values, it would have been some kind of wonderful, and the Flintstones does so well with the hard part of creating its world that it's a shame that putting a story into it doesn't measure up. When I watched this movie, it became very apparent very quickly that it was going to be structured like a cartoon episode, but elongated to a full-length film. They recreated the opening intro to the cartoon show, and even ended it with the cartoon's outro. There were even scenes that were shot just so that pulled off the cartoonesque feel and vibe, and those were really neat and fun to watch. In fact, the plot in this film seems to be the exact opposite of the Fred's New Boss episode of the cartoon itself, where Barney becomes Fred's boss and the Rubbles act snobbish towards the Flintstones. The problem is, a 20-minute max, made-for-TV episode structure does not work verbatim for the structure of a Hollywood movie, and that's what they tried to do. That's what made the reviewers a little more unkind with this film. I thought it was a charming kids' film, and those cartoonesque shots and the set that absolutely brought this cartoon to life were fantastic. But I do have to agree that there were times where it just felt a little too stretched out for me and didn't flow so well. I found myself thinking, if I were a kid, I wouldn't have cared about all of this corporate exposition that they're throwing in here. I mean, I still don't, but I'm sure I would have been even less interested when I was at the age of their target audience. For all of the lighthearted children's show moments in it, there seemed to be just as many stretched out moments and those that would have been boring to kids as well. But no matter what review I looked at, no one knocks how this film looks. It looks great. I had a lot of fun seeing Bedrock City brought to life while keeping that cartoon charm. The set itself took up 10% of the film's $46 million budget and 2 months to build. Every prop, every piece of the set, you name it, had to be built since everything in Bedrock is made out of either stone or animal. Not to mention, the Flintstones' saber-toothed tiger was one of the first CG characters to appear in a film. Though the movie industry has come a long way since this movie, a very complex and specific algorithm for this movie's time had to be developed to calculate the movement for every single strand of fur on this furry beast. Talk about dedication when this tiger wasn't on screen for more than 5 minutes. This movie was also nominated for Best Costumes by the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films, one of the better categories amidst all of the negative ones. The costumes were exceptionally cartoony, and the main cast did not stray from the original source material in the slightest. But since you're basically putting a real person's face to these iconic characters, I can understand why they chose not to deviate where they potentially could have. Where adults may look at John Goodman and think, hey, hey, that's definitely Fred. A very young child may need that more clear-cut indicator that, yes, that very real human being whose face looks nothing like that 2D character that I watch on weekend mornings is in fact said character. Even though I'm no longer a small child, I really enjoyed seeing these costumes unaltered, but I'm sure that the wardrobe department had a lot of fun getting creative for those scenes where Fred and Wilma get their crazier, extravagant outfits during the Flintstones snobby section of the movie. I also really enjoyed all of the references that they jammed into this film that naturally had that Stone Age twist put on them to fit Bedrock style. It kept me actively engaged in the movie, even if it was a little more tedious to watch at times, by both searching the set for those hidden visual Easter eggs and listening to what was going on because they were literally everywhere. Right off the bat in the opening sequence where the Flintstones drive into the drive-in theater, you can see the marquee displaying Tar Wars by George Lucas. Later on, you have Wilma's mother Pearl Slaghoople talk about how Wilma should have married Elliot Firestone, the man who invented the wheel, and how she should at least call him because she could get a discount on tires. They even blatantly added cartoon Fred into the film a couple of times as well. Whenever Fred makes it into the newspaper, or news slab, they always use Fred's cartoon image, and there's even a box of Cocoa Pebbles cereal on the counter behind Fred in the scene where he tells Wilma that he gave the rebels money to adopt Bam Bam. The Bedrock Twitch song also made it into the film a few times, sung by Fred and Barney, and also by the B-52s, who in the movie are called the BC-52s, along with the Jetsons theme that's used as the jingle on Barney's snow cone van. Then of course you have the more obscure references for the avid moviegoers and the art history junkies, both categories that I just so happen to fall under. On the art history side, you have Pablo Picasso's Guernica painting recreated in a more Stone Age style in the Slate & Company building. And let me just say, I geeked out so hecking hard when I saw it and had to back up the scene to make sure I was actually seeing things correctly. On the movie references side, you have both the movies Ghostbusters and Alive represented. The cavern on the green, where Barney temporarily works as a busboy, is actually in reference to the tavern on the green, where the character Louis Tully is possessed by the Keymaster in Ghostbusters. In case you haven't made the connection already, the actor who plays both Barney and Louis is Rick Moranis. In another scene, you can read the news slate headline, "Pterodactyl crashes in Andes and eats rugby team to survive." That references the movie Alive, which released 1 year prior to this film, and is based off of the real-world incident of the 1972 crash of the Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571, where the Old Christians Club rugby team crashed in the Andes and are forced to eat the bodies of their dead friends to survive. It's a really morbid story, but a brilliant movie to watch if you can stomach it. No pun intended. There are so many other references in this movie, though, that it's almost worth watching purely to see what you can find. The cast was also pretty good at portraying their respective characters and their goofiness. John Goodman had always been the #1 candidate to play Fred. Like, Steven Spielberg had told John that he was going to play Fred for him when they'd worked together on an earlier project. And because John agreed to the role, and Steven Spielberg's word is practically law, this entire movie was filmed during John's summer hiatus from the show Roseanne between the 6th and 7th seasons. This actor decisiveness, however, was not the case with Barney. Believe it or not, Danny DeVito was the first pick for this role. He declined, saying his acting style was far too gruff to portray Barney, and subsequently recommended Rick Moranis, who ended up taking the part. After seeing this film, I absolutely cannot imagine Danny DeVito as Barney. I feel like him being in this movie would take this film to a whole new tone and level and make it completely different. Kyle MacLachlan also did a really good cartoony villain through and through, and he was great kid film wacky till the end of the movie. Though I thought Elizabeth Perkins as Wilma and Rosie O'Donnell as Betty were pretty spot on to their characters from the little I'd seen of this cartoon, critics didn't seem to share my thoughts. Both were nominated, if not once, a couple of times as Worst Actress or Supporting Actress, some even saying that the only reason Rosie got her part was because she nailed Betty's laugh, but that was the only thing she could get right. Dame Elizabeth Taylor fared no better with her own bleak Worst Actress awards, but in this instance, I begrudgingly agree. I hate that I agree because I really enjoy Elizabeth, but this was just not her movie. I think she gets slammed a little extra hard for this film because she is who she is, and people were excited to have such a legend in this film, but this performance just did not live up to that Academy Award-winning actress status. I also think that giving Halle Berry's character Miss Stone so much screen time was a little odd. This might have been due to the fact that the structure of this film was an extended cartoon episode, but I think a lot of her time could have been scrapped. I know it's super common to have that sexy female assistant come into an episode purely to distract the lead from the heinous plot, especially in earlier shows such as the Flintstones, and that's exactly what Miss Stone did, but it was too much. No one can deny that Halle Berry is gorgeous, and I'd absolutely hire her as my own assistant. But having her on screen just to be way too over the top, in-your-face flirty in a very kid-focused film seemed a little too out of place for me. Overall, I'd have to say that I agree a little bit more so with the 25% audience score and 23% tomato meter ratings. It feels accurate, even if this isn't the worst live-action adaptation of a kids show I've seen. It's not that I entirely disliked it, because I did have some fun watching it. It just felt like a very long, far too dragged out episode. Then again, when I asked to see if they had this movie at my local movie exchange, the people at the register seemed so happy to talk about how much they liked and enjoyed this film and its sequel, so I know firsthand that there are fans of this movie out there. I can't say it necessarily holds up today, as the special effects are a little outdated, and had threads like embezzlement and aptitude tests that children then and now would find boring. Unless you're a special effects junkie or Flintstones enthusiast, this movie probably isn't for you. I firmly believe that the tie-in promotions this movie had with McDonald's, a super common trend for kids' movies throughout the 90s and early 2000s, was why it did so well in theaters, to the point that it became the highest grossing film based on a TV series at the time, despite the crappy reviews it received. So how well did it do in theaters to be able to land such success? With a budget of $46 million, the Flintstones generated an overall domestic revenue of $130,531,208 at the box office. The Flintstones also bowled their way to first place in highest monthly earnings their first month in theaters, with May earnings at $39,693,235, making this our first movie in our 90s group to win both categories. Between Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and the Flintstones, May is turning out to be a pretty lucky month for double category winners. If you're a Flintstones fan, I'd love to know what you like and dislike about this film regarding the cartoon. And, to those out there like myself who've watched this movie but have minimal Flintstone knowledge, I want to hear from you too. Did you think Barney should have repaid Fred differently instead of swapping the test scores? Do you miss the 90s and 2000s McDonald's Happy Meal promotional toys? Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next week in 2004.
I should have signed with Disney. They never would have allowed this sort of thing to happen.